I'm going uphill to reach the sky. No one can tell me no. I'm gonna.
Hello and welcome to the Struggles to Success podcast, the podcast that helps you use struggles to become stronger, better, and more successful. I am Dr. Emmanuel, your host, and it's a real pleasure to welcome all of you to this podcast. I want to take a moment to also thank you because this podcast is growing very fast. The audience is growing very fast. In the last month, we've moved from 200 subscribers to over 2,000 subscribers. So 10 times in a month. So that is really what we've been trying to do. We are on a mission to ensure that everybody learns the skill of turning struggles to success. And with your help, we are making it happen. We are changing lives and you are also changing your life. So keep doing what you're doing. Subscribe, share, and like. Now, today's conversation is going to be a great conversation. I've been looking forward to this conversation, looking forward to it because it's a topic which cuts across all aspects of life. I went to the gym today and I was trying to improve my performance in the gym, running on the treadmill, trying to run faster. I went for a swim, also trying to run fast, to swim faster. And it's also what we do at work. We're at work trying to improve performance. I'm a doctor, infectious disease physician, and I'm always trying to improve quality, patient safety, activity, and of course, trying to grow the business in the hospital. It also applies to our relationships, trying to make our relationships better, etc., etc. So the topic is improving performance and high performance. And I am really delighted to welcome our special guest today. He is somebody who is an expert in the field. And our guest is Gaj Ravichandra. Now, you may not know him, so I'm going to give you a picture of who he is. Gaj, I've read his bio and it is fascinating. So bear with me. So he is a highly sought after high performance coach. He is somebody with a lot of experience in coaching people to become excellent, to improve their performance. He is a psychologist by background. He is Australian, but working in Dubai, and family is back in Australia. And he works with people all over the world through his company called Compass Consultancy, which is a talent management consultancy, helping people to improve their performance in different fields. So he helps leaders become more effective in leadership. He helps individuals improve their performance. Sports teams also become better at what they do in sports. Educational institutions also becoming better in education. All aspects really of performance. And so I know I've got your attention and I know you are going to leave this session with things that you're going to do to change your life and become more successful. So it's really a pleasure to welcome you, Gaj. You're very welcome to this podcast.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And I think it's never easy listening to someone talk about yourself. But I appreciate that introduction and I really love your mission. I think it is such a wonderful thing that you do. And I really don't know how you have the time to do this, but clearly it is something of value and importance to you and to your community. And I think it's terrific. So yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for accepting to join the podcast. Thank you also for joining the mission, and thank you for giving, because you're going to give people today free information and information that may change their lives. And so that is what this is all about, and that's why we do what we do, try and change lives. And so I've introduced you and painted a picture so people should see who you are. Is there anything you want to add to what I've just said?
Look, I think the biggest part for me is that we all go through struggle. I've got a couple of struggles that I can talk about, today, on a personal level. Um, what I love about struggle is that it's through the struggle that where growth happens. And I think for me, growth has become the number one important criteria in determining the quality of my life. It used to be happiness, Emmanuel. I used to strive for happiness. That was the thing that I always wanted to have. And then I realized that happiness is very transitory. As one of my uncles says, it's between two periods of sadness, right? And
Wow.
so one of the things about happiness is that really the goal, the thing that I'm striving for, or is it the growth? And the growth happens in the struggle. So I think this is a very apt podcast to be on, talking about this, because I think for me, that's what I'm keen on doing, and supporting other people, to grow.
What you just said so resonates so much with me and the mission of getting people to learn that skill of struggle, turning struggles into success. As you say, great people don't just go through a struggle. They use it to grow and also make other people grow through the struggle. And that's what great people do. And it helps you also to innovate, learn problem solving skills, become more resilient, learn leadership skills. And at the end of it, as you mentioned, the outcome, you become healthier, you may become wealthier, you become more fulfilled.
Yes.
You don't shy away from solving problems. You actually may enjoy solving problems, and you may even find your passion and purpose in life, and improve relationships. So there are real benefits in learning this skill. Certainly on a personal level, learning it means that I tend to go towards a struggle. When there's a problem, a big problem, I tend to gravitate towards it and use it actually to make things better. And I'm sure from your story, we're going to hear something really similar. So really looking forward to it. So I wanted to start, tell us how you got to where you've got to now. I'm sure it wasn't just a walk in the park. We're all eyes open and ears listening.
Yeah, so I think the struggles really started. I was born in Sri Lanka, in the north of Sri Lanka, in a town or a city called Jaffna. I'm a Sri Lankan Tamil, and when I was 4 years old, my parents moved from Sri Lanka to Australia. It
Wow.
was probably one of the best decisions that they made. There was civil unrest, civil war unfolding in Sri Lanka at the time.
Mm,
There was a lot of issues with the Sri Lankan government and the minority groups, in particular the Tamils. So my parents made this decision, which a lot of parents around the world, make this very brave, courageous decision to uproot, right, their
mm,
family and their history,
mm,
and to move to a new place for a better way of life. And my parents decided to do that. Fortunately, they had an uncle who was in Canberra, the capital of Australia at the time, and we moved there. My dad is a civil engineer, and he was unemployed for the first 6 months. Would have been a very difficult time for him. Um,
mm.
I don't remember any of that difficulty because I was 4 years old. I had a younger daughter who was 2, and I was with my cousins. So we had a great time living with them, for the first 2 years. Um, but it wasn't until I think, going through school, and I remember certain things that happened to me upon reflection, right? That kind of really laid down very important anchors in my life that then were like benchmarks for me.
Mm.
One of the first one I remember was when I was 8 years old, is when I was introduced to this concept of the people pleasing approach. I don't know if you're a people pleaser, Emmanuel, or you've managed to get yourself out of that mode. Um, but for most of my life, I have been a people pleaser. And what happened was, I remember coming home with my report card. And I don't know, you might have had a similar experience to this. Grades are very important, right? Our report card is very
Extremely
important to us.
important. Extremely important. Also,
Um,
I'm from Africa, so that background was grades are extremely important. You report at the end of every term with your report card for your parents to
Absolutely.
inspect.
Particularly the collectivist cultures, right? Where, if we don't do well, it brings shame on our family, it brings shame on our community. It's not just the individualistic, sort of approach, right? So I was by that point, been in the country for 3-4 years. I brought the report card home. The only grade that I got, which was not an A, was English. I got a B. And my mother didn't speak to me for 3 days, right? Now, she didn't do that to intentionally hurt me. She was just dealing with her own sort of issues, right, around that. And the way that that story got created in my mind, the narrative or the script that was created in that moment as an 8-year-old was that if I don't please the people that love me, I might lose their love and affection. Right? Now, I'm 8 years old, right? Fast forward, I'm 46 years old now. I still have elements of that, right? That dictate parts of my life. I'm just more aware about that now, that I don't want that to control me, right, in terms of what I do. And so I think that 8-year-old Gaj, right, having that experience laid the foundation for a whole bunch of decades and decades of people pleasing. I don't think it was an accident that I got into psychology, that I wanted to help people, that I wanted to make sure their lives were better. The relationships that I have with my friends, with my daughters, I have an 18-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old daughter, very much about trying to please them wherever I can, and with my wife, right? So I think, that was a challenge that I needed to overcome. It has impacted many parts of my life. I've been a people pleaser in my own marriage for way too long, right? I think trying to please my wife and keep her happy, compromising one's own values, right? And I meet couples all the time, as part of our work, that do that. They feel that they need to please other people so that they don't have love or affection withdrawn from where they are. And so, a lot of these things, it reminded me that, who we are as adults very much planted in our childhood and our early years. I thought, which was really interesting. I don't
Amazing.
know. Were you a people pleaser? Or are you a people
I
pleaser?
in some aspects actually. So
Yeah.
I identify with nearly everything you've said there, with being a people's pleaser and always trying to please our wives, and happy wife and is happy life, isn't it? That's a
Yeah.
famous
No one's.
saying. So that we are also constantly on a mission to make sure our partner or husband, wives are comfortable, and so I completely identify with that. I also identify with immigration as leaving Cameroon and going to the UK and working my way through professional life there. But my father also emigrated to Australia, from Cameroon to Australia. We were in Canberra. So you were saying that, I was smiling.
Yeah, it's
So it's
fantastic.
amazing. It's amazing how much we have in common just by having a conversation. So my father also, we spent 3 years in Canberra as in primary school. And so I also identify with that, also needing to have very high performance, and some incidents also where I brought back report cards, which was very good, but one grade may have just been not an A,
Yeah.
and the reaction was, you can do better, and that also made me work extremely hard.
Yeah.
And perhaps also why I am where I am now, and why I also have high expectations of people around me, and sometimes maybe too high, and so we have to be conscious of that. That sometimes we because of what we've gone through and our expectations, we also have high expect people to perform, and maybe put unnecessary pressure on other people. So
Yeah.
completely identify with all that you've said there.
Yeah.
I was also, as you were talking, thinking about the people's pleaser, because as a infectious disease physician, and we have a training program for fellows who are specializing in infectious diseases, and I had a conversation about people pleasing with a fellow last week, and who is a very nice fellow, bless him, but he wants to please everybody and doesn't want to have a conversation when it's a crucial conversation with other people in the team or out of the team. And we had a conversation about, you can't always be a people pleaser. You also have to have those conversations, difficult as they may be. They are really important. So really, thank you so much for sharing that. And we can really see how something which was a struggle actually has led you to better things. And you now have an understanding of it. And I think your psychology background has also helped, because I can see how deeply you've analyzed that.
Well, it's interesting, and also, being an immigrant child, I think, there's this interesting thing where you feel like you're stuck between these two worlds, right? You're stuck between this collectivist Eastern, mindset. For us, it was a Sri Lankan, subcontinental mindset, and then we have this, Western mindset, this very individualistic, mindset. So it's a bit like being Batman and Bruce Wayne. During the day, you've got to be this Western-minded, individualistic, talk about your achievements, go out there and be confident. And then when you're at home, no one wants to hear about how great you are because the collective is much more important than the individualistic.
Absolutely.
And so I found, I originally thought that was a curse. I thought it was something that was actually very unhelpful for me. But what I've grown to understand and appreciate is that I get to understand now both worlds. I get to appreciate where people are coming from, where they are torn, perhaps where there are certain pressures, stresses that are impacting them, and that you get to switch, right? You don't have to stay in one mode of operating, right? I think the flexibility, the cognitive flexibility that we can have is super important, and we don't necessarily lean into that. And I think that was an interesting thing. Again, through the struggle came the growth, right? I think, which
Absolutely.
is interesting.
Absolutely. Perhaps the people pleasing aspect is the reason why we're both on this podcast now. Also, trying to help people, but it's actually it's a good thing in my philosophy, and I'm sure we're similar in that aspect. The more you give, the more you get, and so if you
Yeah,
give openly without any strings attached, the best comes back to you. And so
yeah,
my experience of it is pleasing people. Actually, it's nice. You feel better, and
yeah,
more comes back.
absolutely. And I think sometimes, you know, we get stuck on the people pleasing part, but actually, what if we looked at situation pleasing as well, right? So sometimes we may think that we're trying to be nice to this person, but we need to be nice to the situation. And, I'm
Hmm.
sure there are situations where you've had to deliver pretty uncomfortable news, right, to
Yeah.
people.
Hmm.
And you may look at it objectively and say, well, I'm not going to please any person here with this news, but the situation requires this of me.
Hmm.
And this is what I need to do in that moment.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
sometimes just having that ability to distance yourself from the in the context from that situation um, allows you to do some amazing things.
Fascinating.
Mhm.
Again, fascinating conversation. I'm going to ask everybody listening. I hope, and I know you're getting a lot out of it. Subscribe, follow, share the podcast, and just as an advert of something coming, we're also working on an online course, and the online course details will be available very soon. And again, it's the same mission: get as many people to learn the skill of turning struggles to success. So look out for that. Gaj, we're listening very attentively, and I thought you said you had more struggles. So
Yeah.
it's we're listening.
You're going to get bored of my struggles by the end of this, Emmanuel. But
Not at all.
I'm trying to think of one that might be interesting was also setting up the business, right? And that happened in 2013 here. We'd moved to Dubai as a family, as a young family, in 2008, just before the financial crisis. A few months
Wow.
before the financial crisis hit, and uh, came into an organization that I thought was really sound and secure. Um, and I brought my 2-year-old daughter at the time, just about to turn 2, and my wife. And within the first week, I came home from that first week, and I said to my wife, "I think I've made the biggest mistake of my life, and I think
Mm,
I've dragged you guys into this." Um, the owners of that business were very difficult to work with, very toxic environment that was created there, and uh, we went from over that course of the year, and the financial crisis obviously was hitting during that time. Um, went from 25 people to 7 people, right, in the organization. So it was a very boutique consultancy. We moved into 7 people. Um, but out of that came relationships that have stood the test of time. Other peers, that I met on that journey, one of them became one of the partners of Compass. And so we built, a very
Fascinating.
strong relationship. Through crisis, through hardship, you start to really see the true nature of people, right, coming through. And it's a bit like in psychology when we talk about personality. When there is stress, you tend to revert to your natural style, right? So if you're naturally a very detail-oriented person, during stress, you go even further into the detail. Now, that's a problem and a curse, right? Because sometimes you might need to step away and look at the bigger picture during stress, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're naturally drawn to the detail, and so, we found that there's interesting things were happening in the relationships between people. And so through that process, I separated from that organization after about a year and then joined another consultancy business. Learned a lot, had some wonderful mentors. And it was one of the mentors who was one of the owners of that business who said to me, Gaj, you need to leave and set up your own company. I don't know what you're doing working for somebody else. And so I didn't listen to that advice. I went and actually thought I had one more corporate gig in me. And I think this is a lot about the lack of confidence in self, right? I'm going to jump from the corporate world into being an entrepreneur, which I'd never done before. I lasted 9 months, Emmanuel, and then I realized this was not going to be for me. And then I went and set up Compass with 2 other business partners, which was, one of the best things professionally I've ever done in my life. It's
Wow.
so rewarding and fulfilling. But I can't tell you how many, and you talk about this, the wave, the ocean, the ups and downs, of life. I used to wake up every morning at 4 o'clock and go for a walk along the beach in Jumeirah Beach here in Dubai, and be wondering, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to put myself into a situation where there is some stability for my family? And after a few months of this, I started realizing that I was focusing on the wrong things. I was focusing on outcomes and not the process, right? And so as soon as I shifted from the stress and the pressure of the outcome to falling in love with the process of my day-to-day interacting with my coachees, helping to grow the business, focusing on my clients and my relationships with my founders, things started to change. And the byproduct of that, falling in love with the process, was all the other things that I was looking for. And I think that for me was a massive lesson for myself, that simply by shifting focus, you start to look at the things that are in your control. And the things in your control are the things that we should be spending time on. And I think that was super important for me, and it relieved me a lot of that.
Wow. You've gone through a lot there, and I can just see light bulbs switching on,
Yeah.
popping left, right, and center. And there's so much. I'm sure people listening are having an epiphany with those bulbs. And you started off with talking about a common problem, immigration, but quite common in the UAE, Abu Dhabi and Dubai, where you move to a new country thinking it's El Dorado, and you get there and you realize, I've made a mistake. This is not what I expected. And I smile because when I moved to the first hospital I worked in here, it was a similar thing. I went there expecting to work in a big department, and then I went there and realized the department was me.
Wow.
There was nobody else, and and nothing was set up, so I had to set up everything. So many times I had the white flag in my hand, ready to put it up, and I said, "I'll keep going." Now it's the biggest infectious disease department in the UAE, and probably I'm not boasting. I'm sure people would say it's probably the best infectious disease department in the UAE, with a big team, great people working with in 5 years. And there will be many people that have been in that situation that you just described, when you think, I've made the wrong decision. and I really like the way you realize it really early. Often people don't; they keep going, and then you decided to pivot. And I was also interested by the fact that you pivoted to another job. And again, I was linking what you said before about people pleasing, and maybe whether that was also a part of it. And
Yeah.
working within an organization, I think we tend to work in an organization because we also want to be part of a system, helping others that are working with, and it's not very easy when to detach and then set up your own company. And then about relationships also, I was reflecting on what you said about how you developed a very strong relationship through the process, and
Mm.
sometimes the most difficult roads you take in life lead you to something really really good, and that's is what struggles do. And you develop a relationship with a person who is a partner in your business now, and doing really well. I was really curious also, so wondering um, what 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 was the thing that sort of switched and pushed you to actually say, "Let me set up my own business"? What was the trigger, rather than
Yeah.
going for a third employer?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me was the support base around me, I think is really important. And fortunately for me, I have a very big fan who is my wife, right? And, from the very beginning, when I had nothing, Emmanuel, and I was in fact in debt when I met my wife at 21 years of age, student debt and various things. Um, she said this one thing to me, which I'll never forget, right? She said, you know what? I see something in you that you don't see in yourself, right?
Wow,
I'll never forget
that's
it.
profound. That's very profound.
So I needed to hear it, right? And it reminded me that even in the time when I, as a human who is fallible, uh, just because I'm a psychologist doesn't mean I'm in control of my mind at all times, right? Um, at that time, I needed to hear something that would trigger a series of reactions within me, right? To give me some confidence to trust in myself, right? That I was more than just a shell of a person, right? There was a
Mm,
vision or a mission or something that I could tie myself to that was going to be bigger than me, that I could be a part of. And I think, if my wife played an instrumental role in 2012, just before we started the business, to tell me, you really need to do this. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay, right? It'll work out, right? And you got to trust yourself. And I think that had a massive impact on me. Also having these founders, right, around me. So I started to realize that one of the reasons that I hadn't set up this business yet, because I thought I had to do it by myself, right? I didn't realize that I was part of a community. There were people around me that you can lean on, right? And so all of a sudden, I went from being this inward decision making person to looking outside myself, right? Being objective about myself. Now, as individuals, we are all terrible at being objective about ourselves. That is the human condition, right? And so we need this group of people around us to help us to do that. I have a coach, I have a mentor, and I have a therapist. I have multiple mentors, but I have a therapist, I have a coach. It's part of the process of being a psychologist, but I think I also need good people around me, right, to constantly interact with and challenge me. And I think, I have to put my money where my mouth is, right? If I'm suggesting to people that we should do this, then I should do it myself. And it has been profoundly valuable to me to hear and be challenged by people who I respect, who are, and it was a bit of feedback that I remember hearing from an old boss of mine, which was, take feedback from people who are fighting in the arena. And what it meant for me is, if you're just getting random voices coming from people who have never set up their own business, right, who've never set up an infectious diseases department before, who are just commenting, right, on the side, that noise that we hear sometimes, it's just that noise. Don't listen to them. It's noise, right? What you want to do is to find people who are in the arena fighting with you, fighting for you, who have had the fight, right? Those voices are really important to hear. And so if you surround yourself with these people, magic starts to happen. And I think it's quite an interesting thing, sort of way of trying to reduce this sort of distraction, right, that we have in our lives. I don't know if that resonates at all.
It does. Light bulbs resonates completely. And I was reflecting, and there's so much commonality. And I think we should take the opportunity to celebrate our wives. And
Yeah.
because what your wife did for you there, and did, I think she was like a coach.
Yeah.
She probably asked you a question or made a statement which got you into action.
Mm.
And we need to celebrate our wives for what they do. And I have a similar experience also with my wife, since from Cameroon, who believed in me since medical school, and has always been by my side, and never doubted anything that I am able to do. So very similar, and I think as the listeners, the podcast listeners, will identify completely with that. Our partners, wives or husbands, we tend to have relationships with our wives, which are personal relationships, intimate relationships, but they are also coaches, and help each other in different ways. So really identify with that. I also identified with having people around you who are mentors, coaches, and I think we've swiftly or smoothly moved into improving performance and high performance, which
Yeah.
was the topic of today, with what you've just said. Because my understanding is that people who perform well don't do that by chance. They have mentors, they have coaches, and they don't do it on their own. And some people do it unconsciously and naturally with people around them, like, for example, your wife and my wife, and other family members, maybe parents, maybe siblings, or even children that may sometimes ask you questions that get you into action. And the
Yeah.
people at work, and certainly in my book, From Struggle to Success, I also mentioned that it's important to speak to people who have done it. It's like people who had the scars from that fight. Speak to them, because they know what the things you should avoid, and that's also the reason for this podcast, which is learning from other people who have learned the skill of turning struggles into success, because they have the scars they've learned, and you don't want to make the same mistakes that they've made. You actually want to use their lessons to become even better and more successful. So completely identify with that. With this podcast, everybody gets something different. And I'm sure other people listening will be taking something completely different from the things I've just said, and fascinating. As I said, we've moved very smoothly and effortlessly into high performance, and that is that is what you do. And I read your bio, also listened to some podcasts that you've been involved in before, and that is the expertise you have and the skill that you have in being able to take people, organizations, individuals, teams from A to B, and take them up a hill, up to the top of the hill, when they're better, stronger, more successful, or excellent. So I wondered whether they were what, in your term, what is improving performance? What is high performance?
For me, high performance is sometimes it's a very objective, thing. You've got a certain goal that you want to achieve, right? And that can be, quite tangible. You can say, we want to get to this point by this time frame, and so forth. In most cases, it's really about improvement and growth, right? And I think for me, there are a lot of factors that contribute to that. We specialize in a certain number of them, which I think are super important. And even just the idea of having the right people around you, when we talked about performance, right? I mean, I got a friend of mine who used to play professional football, Alan Nielsen. He's a Danish football player, used to play for Tottenham and Bayern Munich. He used to have this rule around high performance, which I thought was really interesting. And it was called the 1/3 rule, which basically said your time should be distributed 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 between these three groups of people. 1/3 of your time should be spent with people who are a lower performance than you, right? So it means that you are teaching them. You are reinforcing the lessons that you have learned. It's a bit like when you're learning the times tables, right? Initially, it's not very great, but over time, as you reinforce, I know that 8 times 5 equals 40. You can ask me anything on the times tables. I'm going to tell you, Emmanuel, right, what those things are because of the effort that I've put into it by teaching myself, but also teaching my children, teaching other people. 1/3 of your time should be spent with your peers, the people who are similar to you, right? Maybe there are other specialists for yourself who have built other departments, right? Or working in infectious diseases or in, other faculty, right? But 1/3 of your time, this is the hardest part, it should be spent with people better than you. All right. Now, that is the one that is the most challenging for people when I speak to them. And I ask them, tell me about the 1/3, what's happening? They say, I barely speak to people who are better than me. Right. And so, therefore, as a result of that, how are you going to visualize or get to that point, right, where you're going to be operating at a higher level? So, spending time learning, absorbing, whatever it might be from those individuals, I think is really important from that. I think the other thing is also you've got to have a vision or a purpose as to why you want to improve in anything, right? If you think about an entrepreneur, for example, an entrepreneur goes and becomes a high performer. They flog themselves to be the best they can be because they have something that they're striving for that is better than them, that is bigger than them, right? It has to have a bigger impact. And so, it's funny, I was talking to an organization, a multinational here, about work-life balance. And I said, oh, so I guess you're not enjoying your work then? They said, no, we are. I said, oh, that's interesting. Why would you be talking about work-life balance then? And because it never comes up when I talk to an entrepreneur, right? No
You got
entrepreneur
it.
who's passionate about what they do ever talks about work-life balance. Now, that is not to say that we shouldn't be managing our energy and we shouldn't be looking after ourselves. That self-care is absolutely critical, right? But most of the time when we talk about work-life balance, we are generally perhaps feeling like work is eroding who we are, our identity, right? It's taking us away from doing things that we could be doing that are more enjoyable, right? Now, the question to me for most people is, how are you going to be a high performer if you're worried about work-life balance? I'm yet to meet, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Emmanuel, if you've ever met anybody like this. Have you met anybody who is the top of their field who has worried about work-life balance?
No,
No, it's just not possible,
no.
right? And the reason is the vision or the mission consumes you, right? It becomes a part of your identity and who you are. You actually get energy from that mission, right? Yes, you have to give energy, but you also receive energy from that mission. So high performance, to sustain high performance, you need to be able to also have that energy. I call that the energy ATM, right? That, during the course of the day, if you just keep going to this ATM and withdrawing energy all the time, right? What happens at the end of the day? You're bankrupt,
Runs out.
right? You're out, right? So during the day, you need to be depositing into that ATM, right? That needs to happen. And so I think a lot of us sometimes forget that what we do during the day, whether we are at home with the family, whether we are at a workplace, whether we are doing charity work, right, needs to not only be energy consuming, but also energy originating as well. Right?
Wow, that's just also fascinating. And I have a few thoughts about what you've just said. The first is about I was smiling when you were talking about Tottenham because I'm a Tottenham fan.
All right.
So I am a Tottenham fan, and I was really I won't forget the 1/3 rule because it's such an important aspect. And now you said it, I understand it because and it applies to what I do as infectious disease physician because we've got a fellowship, so we train doctors are specializing, and then we have our team as consultants, infectious disease physicians in our team, and then we also have people work with other executives in the hospital, and I'm constantly moving across, and also within the hospital across PAs, consultants, and heads of departments, and it really is a rewarding week when I've spent a good amount of time in all three spaces. with the executive teams and with the peers and in hospital and consulting peers, as well as with the fellows. And so that completely resonates. And so people are maybe trying to do it or maybe unconscious of it. But now that you said it, it really helped, I think, the listeners, because they're going to do it more purposefully. Successful people do it purposefully. They just look back and say, this week, what about that top 1/3, which is difficult? How am I going to do that? And so that really helped. Well, I was also reflecting on work-life balance, and especially in the UAE, it's very tricky to dissociate work from home life. Certainly, as a doctor, you can be called anytime. And now with the team, it's less so because we have on call. But before, there was no difference between me at work and home, because they could call me anytime because I was a single physician.
Yes.
And so I also had to consciously make sure that I am happy at work and happy at home, and I rest at work and I rest at home. There is no difference between home and life in terms of stress and rest, because you can't dissociate them. And having that mission is so important. I wonder whether now you've made me reflect on, is that why we do this From Struggles to Success podcast? Perhaps that is why. Is also having that mission.
It's not an accident, right? It's
absolutely.
The dots are clear. It's connected. The more that they're aligned, I think the more sense of this fulfillment, right?
Fulfillment,
that tends to come. It's interesting what you were saying around. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please. Yeah.
This thing about our mindset, right, around some of these challenges we might face around setting boundaries, right? If we imagine we have these physical boundaries, we can put up a fence, right, to protect our home, from wolves and lions and tigers and bears, whatever you are. But we don't do that in our mind, right? We don't set up the sort of visual fence in our minds to protect ourselves from those things. And we are actually able to do that, right? Because we need to determine whether we are in control or not. Now, when we feel we're not in control, that's when we play the victim card, right? That things are happening to us, right? We are not able to enforce those things. And I think, that's the opportunity where I think, high performers tend to think from the perspective of being in control. Their locus of control is internal. It's not external. It's not the environment. It's not the nature of the economy. It's not the weather. It's not their mood, their boss's mood, right? Yes, they're all factors, right? But their actual determinant of the quality of their life needs to come from here. And, when you make that choice, right, it's a bit like the idea, and this is a little bit controversial, that stress is a choice. Because you can put
how
people
you react to.
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
You react.
Imagine you and I going down the main highway here, Sheikh Zayed Road, right, in the UAE, and someone cuts in front of both of us, right? The same stressor, right? And you are calm. You let that person come through. You just back off a little bit. Whereas for me, I might be beeping my horn, flashing my lights, doing all sorts of things. Same stress, but stress is a choice, right? And we get to choose how we respond. We are not victims of the stress, right? We are actually participants, active participants in that stress. And therefore, we have a choice to make about how we choose to respond. And that is, for me, at the crux of all of this, right, is the actual formula that runs all of our lives. It is the formula, the algorithm, and I'm sure you've come across this, you've seen this many times. There is one algorithm that runs every human being on this planet. And that is that thoughts affect feelings and feelings affect behavior. That is the cognitive cycle. And every single human being can be explained using that same mechanism. And when we learn that our thoughts, when we control our thoughts, that then manages to control our feelings, how we feel about a situation, and then our behavior, our actions, right? This is why some people can face the same crisis and have a completely different outcome.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so, what's really interesting, and this kind of hit me in third year university, which was that the mind and the brain are two separate things. I don't know why I didn't realize this up to that point. I'm a bit slow, Emmanuel. So, you would have got this a lot faster than me. But I realized that the brain is a survival mechanism. That's all it is. It's just there to survive, right? The mind is our thriving mechanism. It is, if you like, the software, and the brain is the hardware.
Hardware.
Now, every time I've got an iPhone, right? Every time these freaking iOS upgrades keep coming up on my phone, right? Either I accept it or I deny it, right? And life is the same. Life keeps giving us, particularly through the struggles, the opportunity to upgrade our software. But we can choose to decline the upgrade. That is our choice. So the question is, do I choose to accept the upgrade? And therefore, what is in it for me through that process? And therefore, the upgrade of the software just keeps happening. It's a fluid process. Every day we are upgrading, right? That part I love about what I do, because I see it in every person I interact with. I see it in myself, right? And so I have to choose the upgrade. Upgrade is not going to choose me. Right? Yeah.
I completely, and I love that analogy you've just given about the software upgrade. That struggles are opportunities to upgrade the software. You can choose to ignore it, or you can choose to use it to upgrade the software. And people who are high performers, people who are successful, they do that. They see it as an opportunity, and they convert it into higher software. They go to the next level, and they just keep doing it and enjoying it. And
Yeah,
if you don't
absolutely.
learn the skill, then you don't do it.
Yeah,
And
that's on
that
you.
is so clear. Thank you for putting it that way. It's a brilliant way of putting it. Really, I really completely identify with it. And also, you talked about thoughts, feelings, and behavior, and that has also been a fascinating aspect when I work with people. I also coach. I'm a business and executive coach, and so on a day-to-day basis, I have conversations on the floor with staff, and often it fascinates me why some people faced with a problem will get into action, commit, and do something about it, while others will sit with it.
Yeah.
Will sit with it, and you know what hospital is like.
Yeah.
We have challenges in hospital. We have incidents in hospitals and problems. But for some people, it will be the world is coming to an end. There's nothing we can do. We don't have resources. We don't have enough staff. We're under a lot of pressure. It's too busy. It's too busy. And then nothing gets done. And others, it's okay, what can we do? And they move on and things improve. And so getting the previous group I've just talked about to get to the other side fascinates me, and I wonder from your thought what makes them click. I have my own thoughts about how to do it, but I wondered whether you want to share with from your experience. How do you, when you're coaching people or teams, how do you get them to move from just thoughts to actually changing behavior and doing something and working on the things they have control over?
So let me give you an example on that. It's a really good question. So if you imagine that most of the situations that we're in are actually layered in three ways, right? So what we tend to see is the symptom of the problem. So say, for example, the symptom is people always complaining how busy they are, right? We see this a lot in organizations, right? If you cut one layer down, it is how that person feels about the fact that they're too busy, right? That I feel rushed, I feel anxious, I'm afraid I'm going to make mistakes, all these things are happening, right? The answer actually lies in the next level down. That is where their values are. So I'll give you an example. Because I'm so busy, right, I might make a mistake. And if I might make a mistake, it means that I might lose my job. And if I'm insecure about the stability of my job, and if I know, for example, in an expat environment, if I lose my job, everything goes. Education allowance, my visa, my healthcare. I might have to go back to my home country. I don't want to go back there. So all of a sudden, what we see is people not acting on the symptom, right? And so if we actually address it at the very foundational level, which is your job is safe, right? We want people to feel secure or stable, right? And this has come up a lot in this idea of psychological safety, right, in the workplace. A lot of the work by Amy Edmondson out of Harvard talks a lot about this, right? That people are so worried about, that top level of the symptom that they don't understand what's causing that within me. That's holding me back from being able to do what I need to do. And sometimes they don't feel safe to even talk about this, right? So imagine if, someone, a nurse or someone administrator could come to anybody in the hospital at a higher level and say, hey, you know what? There's way too much work on, and I'm worried about the fact that that's going to result in me making some mistakes. And if I make mistakes, either someone's going to die or someone is going to, there's going to be some other issue or complication, right? Now, if we don't feel safe to say those things, nothing gets changed, right? And then potentially something tragic might happen, right? As a result of no one being able to speak up. So a high-performing team or a high-performing individual is actually able to address the values, that they understand that they're being driven by the values, that what you see on the outside, the surface, what people tell you is simply the symptom, right, of what they say. It's a bit like when people come in for coaching. When you ask them, what's up, what's going on? Very rarely the thing that they tell you in the first 5 minutes is actually the thing that they want to talk about, right?
I
It's
completely
usually
agree.
the levels underneath. I'm sure in your practice it's the same, right? When you come through, there's something underlying there that's sitting there. So I feel that, the high performers piece, what they do differently is they have a better understanding, right, of what are the fundamental drivers for me that are causing me to behave this way. And then you can operate the group think, right? So if you have a team that's coming together, we need to look at how people are thinking. What do you think about this situation, right? Because those thoughts are affecting how you feel and how you behave. Now, here's the interesting thing. Beliefs come from repeated thoughts, right? So
Interesting.
every time I keep telling myself, I'm too busy, I'm too busy, I'm too busy to get to this, my belief is I'm too busy, right? But if I was to tell myself, I need to work out my time, I need to manage my time more effectively, I need to prioritize things, that then starts to become your belief system, right? Or that I do have the time to focus on things that are important. I just need to intentionally do it, not accidentally do it. Now, the scary thing, Emmanuel, is that thoughts become beliefs, beliefs become decisions. That's why people make these decisions quickly on certain things, because they're acting from their beliefs. Now, if the
Beliefs.
beliefs are healthy, that's great. If the beliefs are made from unhelpful thoughts, we have a problem. Yeah? And so I think sometimes we need to go back and rewire and investigate what is happening in the thought mechanism of ourselves, right? We have to start with ourselves first. And then sort of look at the broader, group that's working with us, and seeing whether that makes a difference.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think our listeners will be seeing and now understanding what a high performance coach does and what you do to help people to become better at anything they want to do. Because you really go deep.
You've released the magician's tricks now. I'm going to have to find a new job.
You need somebody to show you to show you how to do it. And so you've what you shared there is really profound and it's an eye opener, because a lot of people will be faced and will be in that sort of blockade. They can't see it. And so what you do is actually give them clarity of what the issue is, and then once they see it, then they could improve. And when you were talking, I was thinking about work last week, about conversations I had also with some of my residents who are training, and they were saying how busy it was in the hospital, and they have typically 3 or 4 patients to see a day. And I was just looking at them smiling, saying, you feel you're busy? Because in the National Health Service in England, a resident like you would have 15 to 30 patients to see a day. And so you believe you're busy, but in reality you are not busy. You're
And
not
that is
busy.
what people are telling themselves, right?
Mm.
They're telling themselves, I'm
They've been
busy.
telling themselves that they're busy because that's what they expect in that environment. That's what most of them expect. So they think they're busy. But I also tell them, if you see 3 patients a day, you will never be as good as somebody who sees 30 patients a day.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
You will always be less competent than somebody who sees 30 patients a day. And
Mm.
so when you're in hospital, your objective is to see as many patients and as many and the most complex patients. Because if you go to the gym and you lift heavyweight, you develop muscle. If you don't,
Yeah.
you have little muscle. So similar to performance, is what you've said is just really, really on the point, and I've really learned a lot from you. I wanted to also see your thoughts about high performance and getting people to use their heart rather than, because we're very much evidence based in a lot of fields, including medicine, and data driven performance for data and all this other brain. And I wondered, what is your own experience of getting people to perform, but using emotions? And that's something which I've found, and I personally also quite effective, and trying to understand where people come from and knowing their story, and then appealing to the story. So for healthcare, it's patients.
Mm.
Once you tell a patient story, everybody in healthcare moves. If you give them
Yeah.
data, they will listen to the data and say thank you very much and go and think
Yeah.
about it. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
No, it's super powerful. And, part of that is around, obviously, with elements of the brain like the amygdala, right? The emotional centers. We know that those centers have driven a lot of our behavior for thousands and thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, right? And why that is so critical is because of the fact that it allows us, I think, to be able to, it relates a lot to storytelling, right? The great stories are the emotional triggers. They're the ones that pull the emotional triggers, right? And so we know through history that humans have learned through stories. And the reason why stories can be powerful is that they evoke certain emotions. And if certain emotions, if you work backwards on that cycle, evoke certain thoughts, they
Wow.
evoke certain beliefs. So, sometimes you can hear a story which does not resonate with you, right? We've all had that experience, right? Someone's saying something and you think, I'm just going to scroll up on this Instagram story. It's rubbish, right? It doesn't have any sort of relevance to me. But then someone else will actually deliver the same message, but they'll say it in a way where they've said something that just triggered an emotional reaction in you. And that is a belief system, right? Typically. At the end of the day, Emmanuel, my general sense is that we are more similar than we are different. Right? The underlying values that we generally share, I think are fairly consistent, around stability and security, around growth and happiness, around feeling loved and a sense of belonging, right? These things are generally shared amongst people. They did some research on, a slight tangent, but they did this research on, the mass shootings in the US,
Mm.
right? And they looked at who are these individuals that are typically doing this. And they are individuals who have lost contact with the communities in which they are in. They don't have a sense of belonging or identity, right, that is attached to them. Why else would you go into a school and go and shoot those kids, right, if you felt a sense of connection or belonging to that community, right? And as a result of that, right, I feel, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mm-hmm.
it used to be that food was at the very bottom, food, shelter, basic sort of stuff, right, that you need to look at. Social connection was in the middle, right? My sense is that there are situations where it is actually reversed, where social belonging is on the foundation. And I can prove it, right, by saying, Emmanuel, would you be willing to give up food for a couple of days so that someone in your community could live?
The answer will be, of course, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now.
So you start flipping things around. You can see that actually that sense of belonging can sometimes replace even just immediate needs that you feel like you might have, right? So imagine if we don't feel a sense of belonging or a connection, right, to something, and this pulls on the emotional triggers that you were talking about, the emotional sort of story, right?
Mm.
Um, that's how powerful the storytelling approach is. Good stories don't focus on data, right? Even when you're selling in a merger and acquisition, we work with investment banks, right? The best M&A deals are done because the other person feels safe taking the purchase, right?
Wow.
Not that they think safety, they feel safe through the process, right? So, in a world that is completely number driven, people are still making decisions based on emotion, right? And I
Interesting.
think that part for me is interesting. The other part is the science tells us there are neurons in your heart, there are neurons in your gut. This is called braining, multiple braining, right? I mean, you know this better than me. So the idea that our systems remember certain things, right? So this is why, for example, if you were to get people to change their behavior, right? One of the best ways to do that is to pull on a story or an emotion or a belief that they have, right? That triggers an emotional reaction. Right? And because of that, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard parents who have given up smoking because they've had kids,
Hmm.
right? They've known all along smoking is bad for them intellectually,
But it
right?
didn't stop.
But as soon as a child comes into the scene, all of a sudden that has to change, right? So it's not an accident that we operate this way. And again, this is helpful when you're leading a team, when you are working with a team. How do you get people to see a side of a story, um, you know, to help the greater good, right? And I think playing with that emotional content is helpful.
Now, we're coming to the hour, and it's really been an honor and a pleasure having this conversation. And I'm sure all our listeners have had so much benefit from this conversation. And before we start rounding up, I wondered whether there was anything else you wanted to share before we start rounding up.
Yeah, I firstly thank you, Emmanuel. I think it's so wonderful what you're doing, not just in your professional career, but vocationally, in terms of what you're doing here as well. Um, we live in a very, very what we call a VUCA world, right? That volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. One of the things that I found is that when we struggle the most is when we feel we're out of control. So anything that we can do to bring that sense of control back to ourselves, right, is going to be really important. There are things that we can control. There are things we can influence. There are things that we should not even be bothered about. Right? We spend way too much time on the things that we should not even be bothered about. So I think from a mental health perspective, from a success and dealing with struggle perspective, bring back the things that are in your control. Write them down. Go and do them. That's going to be one of the best ways to kind of manage, the situation. So I feel like that's one of the do's, right, of kind
It's
of managing situations.
absolutely. And then perhaps a don't?
Don't start by asking everybody else around you for what you need to do. Explore within yourself first, right? Ask some questions of yourself first, right? Because there are always going to be different opinions and everyone has lived a different life to you. No one in the history of mankind has lived your life, sees the world through your lens, right? And so we need to sometimes trust ourselves in terms of what we have experienced. Doesn't mean that you don't go and ask them later, right? In terms of what you might do. But we should not be afraid to ask ourselves first, what is happening to me? What am I thinking, right? How is that causing me to feel? What have been the behaviors that have helped me and been unhelpful to me? So I think don't think the answer lies always outside of yourself. challenge yourself to question yourself deeper.
That is so profound. And I started off the podcast introduction saying we're on a mission to change lives. And the gifts of wisdom you've just shared there, I'm confident will change people's lives. For all our listeners, things will only change if you take action and apply them. So if you listen and you don't do anything about it, there won't be any change. Today has been a fascinating episode. I have so many light bulbs still lit, and that I have to find some time to to switch off before I go to bed today, because you've kept me thinking throughout, and all our listeners, I'm sure you've kept them thinking. You've seen a introduction of what a high performance coach can do to help with improving performance. And so I also want to really take some time just to, again, highlight your consultancy called Compass Consultancy, which we'll also put in the text description of the podcast. So people, organizations, individuals, organization teams that could benefit from your consultancy, your service can reach out to you. I also want to thank Talent and Truth, and before I finish, really just to explain how we got to this podcast, because I received an email from Talent and Truth saying they'd listened to a previous podcast that was done with Dr. Monty Morgan, and was really fascinating and interesting, and proposed that I also invite you. And how good it was that I took that offer, and I'm blessed with the fact that that they asked me to do this, because it's been a fascinating episode. I've learned so much, and I'm sure the listeners have learned so much. So once more, Gaj, thank you for being so generous in sharing information today and your wisdom. This is what the podcast is about: helping people turn struggles into success and learning from others' experience. And your expertise is really wonderful. So thank you for what you do. And for all our listeners, look forward to the next episode. And if you also have other people who you want to propose for me to invite to join the podcast, please do. This is what we do: invite people to join the podcast, share, and help to change your life and other people's life. And Gaj, I'll give you an opportunity for final words, and then I'll close.
No, I think it's wonderful, Emmanuel. I really appreciate what you are doing, and I think one of the key things is, for me, anything that I can do to support your community. I think sometimes, for me, it's a privilege getting invited into everyone's different communities, right? And there's a sense of belonging that comes from that, and I take that as a very serious and very kind gesture, that you have extended to me. And anything that I can do to support your community, by all means. For people to reach out to me, always happy to support and help. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again. And to all our listeners, keep sharing, subscribe, spread the word, follow. And we on a mission to make this podcast viral. We're at 2,000 subscribers. Hopefully the next time we meet, we're increasing by tenfold every month. So no pressure. The next is 20,000. On that note, thank you, and have a wonderful day wherever you are. Thank you.
I'm going up high to reach the sky. No one can tell me no. I'm gonna be an eagle. I'm gonna